The Washington Commanders are heading to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles as 11-point underdogs. This is Showdown coverage brought to you by SharpFootballAnalysis.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, and let's dive right into the slate. Starting at the top, we have Jalen Hurts at a not expensive enough $12,200. I mentioned in the article he probably should have been $12,800, which is what Lamar Jackson typically is. Jalen Hurts ownership is going to be around 75 to 80%. Probably still going to play him. Probably need to still play him. He figures into so many different game environments, but we're going to have to be unique in how we play him. And I'll probably be scarce on how I play him at captain. We're going to actually try to figure out what player might have a big week and play them at captain instead, which puts us on A.J. Brown. So we've got a decision to make between A.J. Brown and Miles Sanders, kind of game script related, but also kind of ownership related because Miles Sanders is an 11-point home favorite at running back is probably going to be relatively highly owned and probably higher owned than A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown has the higher ceiling on the year, but Miles Sanders, of course, has the higher floor as double-digit carries every week except for one this year and 6 touchdowns on the year. So he's been the opposite of what he's been in years past, which is a consistent workhorse. So Miles Sanders probably the better play of the two if it's just raw projections. But in terms of ownership, ceiling, all of those things we like to look at pairing with Jalen Hurts, we'd actually probably prefer A.J. Brown here. So between the two, you've got a decision to make. Taylor Heineke, we've been over this, I think, the last few weeks. It's just the underdog quarterback has been underutilized all season and is probably going to be another one of those games this year. But hey, Taylor Heineke's last game starting, probably Carson Wentz coming back next week. He's already shown the willingness to kind of sling the rock, right? But not necessarily always good. So it's good for the Eagles defense and the Commanders offense for Taylor Heineke to be playing reckless. And he's flirted with the 300-yard bonus. He also had 2 games with multiple touchdowns. So at 9,000, plenty viable. We could see an Andy Dalton performance out of him, which kind of started this whole thing weeks ago. And when Andy Dalton was the optimal captain at like 20% ownership. So that's kind of what we're going to see with Taylor Heineke. He's targeting Terry McLaurin at a decent rate. It's really not the volume. It's just the two connect really well for some reason between this year and last year. It just seems like when Taylor Heineke is in the lineup, Terry McLaurin really thrives. So he's a nice ceiling play coming at low ownership when everyone's going to be decided between A.J. Brown and Miles Sanders, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, leaning on the running backs, leaning on Curtis Samuel. Nobody was going to really want to pay 8,200 for Terry McLaurin. But like I said, he's got, rivals, one of the higher ceilings of the slate. We're not getting 150-yard games out of Terry McLaurin like we've gotten from A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert. But you can get a nice 8-catch, 100 yards and a touchdown from Terry McLaurin. We'll lump Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert together because they're essentially the same price. Dallas Goedert had a blow-up spot last week. His ceiling performance really 8 for 100 and a touchdown. And we haven't really gotten that from him. I wrote him up last week as, the type of play where it's like he's got a very solid floor, but where's his ceiling? Well, of course, he makes me look like an idiot and has a huge ceiling game. But Devonta Smith also has 8 catches for 169 yards on the season. So, like, he's demonstrated that monstrous ceiling, like that wide receiver 1 overall type ceiling. So we're going to get Devonta Smith at an ownership discount. If Devonta Smith was going to be higher owned, I would look at the last 3 weeks and say, wow, we've got 5 catches for 40 yards in like every game over the last 3 weeks. Give me Dallas Goedert. But I'm going to assume that the ownership discount is actually going to be on Smith. So sure, we'll take a shot on Smith, embrace the variance, and go for that ceiling. Let's talk about Antonio Gibson together with Brian Robinson. So Brian Robinson is 5,400. Antonio Gibson 6,800. Remember, J.D. McKissic is out. So this is an interesting situation when Brian Robinson's the quote-unquote starter, except for Curtis. Antonio Gibson's been playing the most snaps over the last few weeks. With J.D. McKissic out last week, it was like 55-45 Antonio Gibson. And a lot of that has to do with Antonio Gibson. He's really been a better fantasy producer when he hasn't been the starter because go figure, the converted wide receiver is good at catching the ball. So he's been involved in the passing game, and this is going to be a game as 11-point dogs where he's going to have to be very involved again. So Antonio Gibson, one of the better plays of the slate at under 7,000, but he's going to be extremely highly owned. And you're still banking on some Washington success, which there may not be any. Brian Robinson probably needs a touchdown to get there, but he will get the first crack at goal line duty, so that's not out of the realm of possibilities. They're both fine. Antonio Gibson probably the preferred option, but you're going to be eating chalk there. Curtis Samuel's my favorite Washington Commander to play. 6,600 is a weird number, just like 6,400 is a weird number for the Eagles, but 6,600 is a weird number for the wide receiver too, and he's close enough to like Dallas Goedert and Devonta Smith that you probably just go up to them, especially when you're pairing them with Jalen Hurts. Like, are you really going to let that $1,000 stop you from getting an extra Eagle in your like 5-1 onslaughts or 4-2 lineups? You're probably just going to find the money to go up to another Eagle, especially since we have cheap commanders that we can go to. So I don't feel like Curtis Samuel is going to have a lot of ownership. I just don't see a lot of people clicking on him at 6,600, and that makes him my favorite play. I mean, he's been one of the more consistent players on their offense, if not the most consistent player. His projection is not easy. Like, his volume varies, but he is producing in multiple ways. I think over the last 2 weeks, he's had at least three rushes a game, which is great for a wide receiver. And his volume in terms of targets is down from week to week, but he's got 12 target upside. So at 6,600, I'm fine clicking on him when others won't. And that brings us to the Eagles, which we discussed earlier. I would play the Eagles and Taylor Heineke lineups pretty easily. It's already a unique pairing. It makes a lot of sense. He's thrown an interception in each of his starts this year. All we need is one of those interceptions to go for a touchdown, and that doesn't mean that Taylor Heineke can't still get there. After all, pick six is still only -1, so it wouldn't be difficult to get Taylor Heineke and the Eagles in the same lineup. We'll talk about a few other guys. Jahan Dotson at 5,000. Might as well talk about him and Kenneth Gainwell. They're kind of in similar boats in terms of usage. So Jahan Dotson's probably going to be on some kind of pitch count coming back in his first game from IR, which is going to be to the benefit of Cam Sims. Cam Sims at minimum price, I believe, has been playing like over 50% of the snaps in Jahan Dotson's absence. So if Dotson's not a full go, we're expecting Cam Sims to still get a little bit of run. So Jahan Dotson's probably going to play somewhere south of 50% of the snaps. And at 5,000 coming back with so much questions, I mean, he's pretty much just like a really expensive punt play, which means he's not out of the player pool. But that's what you're playing for him for, essentially a dart throw. Kenneth Gainwell is the exact same situation, essentially a dart throw. So he's going to get 25% of the snaps. He's probably going to get about 5 rushes. He's probably going to get about 3 targets. And what's he going to do with that? If he scores a touchdown, he's in the optimal lineup. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's probably not, just like what I mentioned with Brian Robinson. So, I mean, Kenneth Gainwell has made me look bad multiple times this year. He just happens to score touchdowns on primetime slates. So I'm prepared for it, but I'm not really playing either of these players at 5,000. I don't think they're the leverage that you need to win this slate. I don't think Quez Watkins is either. He's a fun name to click on, but he's gotten all the way up to 4,200, and he can give you a complete zero. He is essentially Zach Pascal for $3,000 more. So I'd rather play Zach Pascal. They're both getting, 1, 2, 3 targets a game. They're both decent downfield threats. So Quez Watkins, while talented, while it seemed earlier in the season that he had a good connection with Jalen Hurts, just doesn't seem worth it at 4,200. I'd rather play either of the kickers. I would much rather pay up for the Eagles. Usually we have a defense in the 4,000, 5,000 range, but I guess when you're going up against Taylor Heineke, your defense gets up to 6,400. The last two guys, I guess we should talk about. We should talk about Logan Thomas, who came in at like 74% of the snaps last week. 2 weeks ago was his first week back, and he only played, 30, 40% of the snaps, got no targets. So he's working his way back in, but we should be expecting, probably full go this week, full, starting tight end. He'll get 80% of the snaps. He had 3 targets last week, but he didn't make any catches. So, people are probably going to look at that and say, well, maybe just overlook Logan Thomas, but he's back in a full-time role. I mean, he should be around the same price that we see like Dalton Schultz, Robert Tonyan, all those guys coming in at like 5,000, 5,200, 5,400. Logan Thomas would be there and probably will be there the next time we see the Commanders on a showdown slate if we do. So we're getting him at a huge discount at 2,600. Now, I don't know if he's going to be low owned because we'll see how willing people are to be in on that. But Logan Thomas at 2,600 is one of my favorite plays on Washington, especially since it makes it way easier to fit more Eagles. And then Boston Scott's the last player that we should mention because if the game does get out of hand, like even bigger than 11-point spread, we could see a few more carries from Boston Scott. So it's always worth mentioning. Let's go ahead and put together a lineup. My favorite captain is going to be Devonta Smith. I feel like he has the same target opportunity as Dallas Goedert, but he's also got a similar ceiling to AJ Brown. So he's a happy medium and probably the least ownership of those 4 or 5 guys on the Philadelphia side of the ball. So we'll go to captain and we will start with Devonta Smith. And then I mentioned that Curtis Samuel was one of my favorites. So we'll go to 6,600, click on Curtis Samuel. Jalen Hurts is going to be in all my lineups. I'll deal with that chalk. So now you're kind of at the point where it's like, do you want to play Miles Sanders or do you want to play AJ Brown? If it's a Devonta Smith's lineup and you're relying on Devonta Smith's ceiling, you're probably not going to get a big game out of AJ Brown as well. So I'm going to click on Miles Sanders here, see what we have left. So Devonta Smith at captain, Curtis Samuel, Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders. We can go someone like Zach Pascal here. I don't mind having another receiver in the same lineup as my receiver captain if they're cheap. Like, we don't need Zach Pascal to really eat into Devonta Smith's ceiling for Pascal to make value on 1,400. Zach Pascal to make value on 1,400 needs like one catch for 50 yards, whereas AJ Brown to make value needs like 6 for 100. And if he does have 6 for 100, you're probably not getting 6 for 100 and a touchdown out of Devonta Smith, right? So it just makes sense. Like, I will put another wide receiver in, but it can't be a wide receiver that needs the same thing as my captain wide receiver. That leaves us with 8,000 on the table. So you can do so many things with this. You're not going to want to go Dallas Goedert for pretty much exactly what I just said, but Antonio Gibson fits here great and leaves, 1,200 on the table. That's fantastic right here. I mean, Devonta Smith at captain, Curtis Samuel, Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, Zach Pascal, and Antonio Gibson. You're really just banking on Curtis Samuel's ownership coming in low, which I'm guessing because you need Zach Pascal and Curtis Samuel to come in low. But Devonta Smith's only going to be like 5% at captain too. So this lineup works out great, and you can just mix and match your Washington run backs with this. So everything makes sense on the Philadelphia side, and then you can just maybe put in Terry McLaurin and then go down to Brian Robinson or something like that. But that's going to do it for today's showdown coverage, brought to you by sharpfootballanalysis.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde. You can follow me at APWILDE, and we will catch y'all next week.